please. And good afternoon and welcome colleagues, invited guests, members of the general public who are following today's proceedings of the Standing Senate Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs. Today we are continuing our consideration of Bill C-16, an act to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act and the Criminal Code. And with us today for the first hour are Saad, Professor and Chair in Evolutionary Behavioral Sciences and Darwinian Consumption at Concordia University, and Taryn Meyer. Ms. Meyer, thank you both for being with us today. And Professor, I believe you're going to lead off. The floor is yours, sir. And 5 minutes. Hope you are aware of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have spent 20-plus years working at the nexus of evolutionary psychology and the behavioral sciences, a central feature of which is to explore how evolutionary and biological principles shape our human nature. At the root of this grand objective is the profoundly obvious reality that humans are a sexually reproducing, sexually dimorphic species consisting of reproductively viable males and females. This in no way rejects the equally obvious fact that the rich human tapestry includes other personhoods, such as intersexed and transgendered individuals. Following a 2014 lecture that I delivered at Wellesley College on the thought police, I had a conversation with a student who argued passionately that professors should poll their students at the start of class about their gender identities. While most might have construed her position as outlandish back then, some now consider it too tame. Take the Office of BGLTQ Student Life at Harvard University, who recently distributed a flyer to combat transphobia, wherein it was stated that one's gender identity and gender expression could change daily, and that, quote, fixed binaries and biological essentialism constitute transphobic misinformation that is tantamount to systemic violence. Was the Wellesley student transphobic since she did not potentially consider the daily fluidity of one's gender identity? What about minute-to-minute changes? Should professors poll their students every 10th minute of every lecture to find out if their gender identities have changed since last asked? Should academics no longer design surveys wherein a participant's biological sex is measured as a binary variable? Would this be transphobic systemic violence since it perpetuates fixed binaries and biological essentialism? Facebook and New York City allow 50 plus and 31 genders respectively as part of one's profile. Should professors develop surveys that recognize all of these genders? Would it be systemically violent to not do so? Should evolutionists no longer explain how sexual selection works, namely the fundamental process by which sex differences evolve? This mechanism recognizes two sexes, and hence it might, quote, disenfranchise those who reject fixed binaries and biological essentialism. Bottom line, foundational tenets of evolution might be construed as might be construed as legal transgressions under Bill C-16. So evolution itself might be a transgression. Ongoing governmental efforts are pushing for a gender-neutral society to cater to an extraordinarily small number of non-binary or non-gendered people who feel marginalized at having to provide their biological sex as part of their profiles. This is the tyranny of the minority. 99% of the population should acquiesce to having a default feature of their personhood erased because a few individuals might be inconvenienced by it. The slippery slope of totalitarian lunacy awaits us. Some are now proposing that racial categories constitute, quote, biological essentialism, and instead we should respect racial self-identities. This is known as transracialism, as per Rachel Dolezal, who was born white but who self-identifies as black. How long before the government tables legislation to combat bigotry against the transracial? What about fat phobia? There are many more Canadians who are overweight than transgendered, and the collective abuse that they experience is sizable. Should the government legislate such hate? The road to hell is indeed paved with good intentions. As someone who escaped religious persecution in Lebanon and whose parents were kidnapped in Beirut, I fully support the protection of all individuals from institutional discrimination. That said, I am weary of the ethos of victimhood that has parasitized our culture. The operative motto is not, I think, therefore I am, but I am a victim, therefore I am. I refer to this condition as collective Munchausen, namely the pathological quest for sympathy and empathy by proclaiming victim status using identity politics and intersectionality. People have the right to live as equal citizens under the law. They do not have the right to demand that their identities be coddled and celebrated, lest they might otherwise get offended. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Meyer?
My name is Theron Meyer. I provide cultural commentary in written format and on YouTube with a focus on contemporary transgender issues. As a trans woman myself, I take advantage of the freedom of speech that this amazing country has granted me to argue for tolerance and understanding from my fellow man, and to explore how best to negotiate the integration of my transgender brothers and sisters into society. I don't believe there to be any other sustainable, effective method to achieving these goals other than to speak up as individuals and make the case for it, which is exactly why I sit in front of you today. An act to amend the Human Rights Act and Criminal Code threatens the very process by which individual voices inspire change in a democratic society. And in turn, Bill C-16 ultimately works against the very group it's been advertised to protect. Before you accept the bill's purported purpose of equal protection for trans and gender non-conforming people under the law, consider the statements made by the sponsor of the bill, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, Jody Wilson-Raybould. After conceding that the open-endedness of the term identifiable group within the Criminal Code already protects trans people under the law, Minister Wilson-Raybould admits that the purpose of her proposed bill is not so much to legally enshrine the protection of trans people, but instead to send a clear message. Quote, with the bill, we unequivocally say that Canada can do better. We say loudly and clearly that it is time to move beyond mere tolerance of trans people. It is time for their full acceptance and inclusion. It would promote inclusion and respect for trans people. Equal rights for trans persons should not be hidden, but be plain for all to see, end quote. This does not sound like equal protection under the law. This sounds like Canada's most influential lawyer and her cronies playing the role of social justice activists with their political power. And then the final quote from Minister Wilson-Raybould, quote, some of the words and concepts used in the discussion on Bill C-16 may not be familiar to all Canadians, end quote. Another unequivocal confirmation that the bill is not attempting to amend the law in response to a cultural shift, as it should work in a democratic society, but that the bill seeks instead to work in the reverse, using the force of law to intimidate Canadians and then branding it as promoting social change. Besides being anti-democratic and anti-free speech in nature, the idea that Bill C-16 will inspire a better Canada for trans people is a dangerous delusion, as it will do the exact opposite. The definitions for gender identity and gender expression that the bill's supporters have proposed, one is something subjective and unverifiable existing purely in the mind, and the other as being nothing more than fashion sense, are sure to breed a climate of hypersensitivity where people feel they need to walk on eggshells or even outright avoid trans people in fear of prosecution. Because of this, trans and gender non-conforming people will likely lose job opportunities as employers would avoid employing what would become a serious legal liability for them. And Bill C-16 risks perpetuating the already low economic standing of trans people. The bill will also send the impression to Canadians that trans people are too weak to defend and make the case for their identities in a free society, and that the only way for us to exist amongst others is to restrict by draconian law the freedoms of others. By turning us into a source of hypersensitivity, a legal liability, and a group whose existence is contingent on the undue restriction of everyone else's freedom, Bill C-16 is a sure way to engender resentment, intolerance, and true transphobia that will derail the process of acceptance and integration of trans people and keep us relegated to the margins of society. If you truly care about trans and gender non-conforming people, about our lives, and about our livelihood, you will vote against Bill C-16. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both witnesses. And we'll move to questions now, beginning with the Deputy Chair of the Committee, Senator Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for your presentations. The overriding question that comes to mind after listening to your presentations is this. Every Canadian province and territory, except one, I think, has in law, in their human rights codes, they have gender identity, and in most of them, gender expression as well. Others have gender. And this has worked very well. I read case law on a daily basis. I've done it for 50 years. And I can't identify a single case in which that legislation has not worked to everybody's satisfaction. So how do you answer that question? I mean, this is not something new. This is something that has been expected for many years because it forms a part of a much larger area of law, and that is at the provincial and territorial level.
I can't speak to the legal issues. I mean, what really I care to focus on is as a working scientist and as a professor who specializes in evolutionary behavioral sciences, there are endless cases where both in the pursuit of my pedagogy, where I'm teaching students, or in the pursuit of my research, I would be skirting with legal transgressions of Bill C-16 if this bill were to pass. So I can't really speak about all the legal ramifications. All I can say is that I've seen my good friend Jordan Peterson, who I think will be testifying next week, what happened to him at University of Toronto, and I can assure you that that would only be the tip of the spear. And so we have to be careful as to, on the one hand, ensuring that of course all people should live free of hate and discrimination, but also how do you actually materialize these realities? I mean, if literally I were to walk into class and explain, as I mentioned in my opening statements, the fundamental mechanism of evolution, which is sexual selection and natural selection, that itself would be considered transphobic. According to Harvard University, biological essentialism and fixed binaries is a form of systemic violence, to repeat what I said. So now, can I go into my class and teach evolutionary theory? Or would I be engaging in systemic violence against the transgendered? So this is something that, as a professor, concerns me.
I still don't understand where your logic lies, because we already have that law. I mean, education and what's said in our universities and our schools comes under the human rights codes of the provinces. In the human rights codes of the provinces, gender identity is there, gender expression is there. Yes, there's an addition to the criminal code, but we have the provisions in the criminal code that have been clearly identified by the Supreme Court of Canada in Keegstra, 1990. So I can't see where your concern lies and has any justification in our laws as they've been applied today, which covers these very expressions.
Do you want me to respond? So again, I really don't know. I can't speak about the legal issues. Harvard University, a rather prestigious university, is arguing that to argue that something is due to biological essentialism is a form of transphobia. Well, my whole field, all of evolutionary biology and all of evolutionary psychology, would then be committing that systemic violence. So what would I do? What would you suggest for me to do when I walk into class next fall and I wish to teach about sexual selection, which is the mechanism that explains how traits and behaviors evolve across the two sexes? Would that be transphobic? Would that be something that I'm allowed to do or not? I don't know. I can't speak to the legality. I'll defer to your legal expertise. Could the government place me under illegal transgression if this were to pass?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. No.
So then Harvard would be wrong then by proclaiming.
Okay. Senator Platt.
I am glad that we have a lot of judges here who will sit on the bench and rule on this after To both of our guests, thank you very much for being here. Senator Baker has been wanting to get into the legal weeds here, and we have lawyers coming next week, so I will leave the legal questions for them, and I'm sure they will have good answers. I will focus my questions more on the science and ideology surrounding this legislation and the possible implications, and I would like you both to take note of these questions and answer them. And you've already talked about Jordan Peterson, but Jordan Peterson was on TV's The Agenda with Steve Paikin, among other academics, which they were discussing, where they were discussing this bill. And Taryn, I think you were part of that great discussion. There is a professor of transgenderism studies from the University of Toronto who stated in that debate, and I quote, "There is no such a thing as biological sex." Now, for the sake of time, he said for the sake of time, he didn't want to unpack this at length for the viewers. However, he said this was not his opinion. He said that for 50 years, science has proven this. So I would like to get both of your comments on this. And secondly, as an academic, certainly Dr. Saad and Taryn, if you have any comments, do you find it troubling that Jordan Peterson received 2 warning letters from the university because of his perspective on Bill C-16 and particularly in pronouns, but that this comment, no such a thing as biological sex, the same university who houses our biology department is completely silent?
I guess I don't need this. Yes, it troubles me very much. The reason I'm here is because I have witnessed firsthand the unprecedented ideological motivations behind the terms being used, the way they're used, and the way they're defined. I'm not sure what it means that the case law in these provinces have worked just fine. In whose favour have they worked just fine? Because I am aware of the ideological motivations, unprecedented compared to any of the other listed groups in these pieces of law, I think that putting it into federal legislation is a step in the wrong direction. I don't really see why we have to make the problem worse because it's worked. In fact, it has worked quite well. I'm not even sure what that means because I've spoken to lawyers myself who say the exact opposite, that it's dangerous, that it's draconian, and that people have suffered. Even if they didn't get jail time, or even if they didn't get fined, the fact that that the whole process can occur is a problem because that is in itself already traumatizing.
Thank you. Dr. Saad.
To speak to Dr. Peterson's debacle, look, I gave a lecture at the Banning Conference a few months ago where I simply read testimonies that I received, first-hand testimonies from students, from professors, and from the parents of students, where they share with me the stifling environment that they are experiencing at universities, where they are afraid to utter a single syllable out of place, lest somebody might be offended. If I were to read these testimonies here before you in this chamber, you would think that these were testimonies coming out of North Korea. So a free society, as somebody who comes from the Middle East, who has probably experienced more persecution than most of the people put together here in this room, I don't want our universities and our places of thought to be so stifled. So that which Jordan Peterson experienced would have been something that none of us could have envisioned a few years ago, and yet now we are seeing it. I get tons of my colleagues who write to me and say, geez, thank God that there's somebody like you who has the, forgive the term, testicular fortitude to speak out, because we don't have it, and we're terrified of our students, we're terrified of our colleagues, and so that kind of environment is unbecoming of Canada, and I should know what I speak of, having come from a place where these freedoms are not readily available to us.
Thank you. If there's a second round, though.
All right. Thank you, Senator Jaffer.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to both of you for being here. I've listened to you very carefully. I have a question for you, Professor. You and I probably come from same backgrounds. The provincial code and the federal code, when it comes to my race, if somebody discriminates against me, a person of color, I feel very empowered in this country because I have codes, both provincial and federal. If I'm not given a job because of my color, if I cannot rent a place because of my color, I'm protected. So for me, it's a natural step that if there is a group of people who come in front of us and say that because that they are transgender, they are finding it difficult to get a job, they are finding it difficult to rent a place, and they need the protection of the Human Rights Code. I, as a parliamentarian, think I have that protection. How can I deny that protection to them?
So as I said, I strongly support that we all live free of discrimination and hate and bigotry. My concern are precisely the ones that are pushed to the envelope, like the examples that I gave in my prepared statement, like the example of Jordan Peterson. In the case of Jordan Peterson, he wasn't arguing, I'm a landlord and I won't allow you to live in my apartment because you're transgendered. He almost got fired as a tenured professor at the University of Toronto because he refused to acquiesce to using new pronouns, gzir and gze and their in singular form. So the examples that I'm offering you, those examples at the boundary, where if I walk into class and teach about evolution, I might be transgressing Bill C-16, that's what interests me. You and I are in agreement that transgendered people should not be discriminated in all of the ways that you and I would agree. But the devil is in the details. My whole field, evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, would be one gargantuan transgression of Bill C-16, as per the examples that I read for you, and that's something that we need to address.
And that's why it's, and that's why we have to have that. You know, what you brought up is very important. It's a dialogue we should have. Free speech is very important, and hopefully we can continue with this dialogue. But in front of us here is to amend, to add to the Human Rights Code and also to the Criminal Code to protect rights of transgender people, the basic rights that you and I both enjoy. And that's what this bill is about. And so so you and I both agree that protection should be there, right?
To those basic rights. But if you're going to ask me to poll students every 10 minutes to find out if your gender identity has changed.
I didn't even know you do that. So.
Well, Harvard thinks so.
Well, we're not at Harvard,
well,
thank God. This is Canada.
The student at Wellesley thought so. And so what happens when the student comes along and says, look, I'll expect you to follow my gender fluctuations throughout the semester. Today I'd like to be called he, tomorrow she, tomorrow. It sounds as though I'm being facetious, but I'm not, right? These are recorded instances. So I'm just saying that we have to be careful.
It's important you raise that, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Senator Dagenet. Oh, very briefly, please.
I would just like to add that the laws that the bill seeks to amend already does protect trans people under the law, because the term identifiable group applies to trans people. We are very identifiable. And it has been used before these provincial legislations included gender identity and gender expression. Trans people have used when they felt they were discriminated against because they're trans. They have used identifiable group for that. I understand it's a symbolic gesture. It's not pragmatic. This is symbolic. It's supposed to say something about Canada. I get that. But it's like nuking an inconvenient beaver dam. You're solving a fairly small problem, meaning we don't symbolically gesture at that trans people should be accepted in the law. By broadening it vastly, it's not justified.
Senator Dagenet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses.
Madame Mayor, la question est pour vous. On sait que les lois...
Ms. Meyer, the question is for you. We know that the legislation isn't perfect, and we're here to improve it. Is the system working? Do you hear me? You should be on channel 3. 2. Channel 2. Channel 1 is English, channel 2 is French. As I was saying, Laws are not perfect, but here we're trying to improve them through the testimony that we have. In your view, what would be the consequences of this bill if some parts of it were ignored or taken out in the drafting?
En français, la personne a dit.
Channel 1 is English. Channel 1 is English. Channel 1 is in English. The English is Channel 1. The English is Channel 1.
It's okay. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me in English? Can you hear what I'm saying in English? Or we can always try it in Italian. Can you hear? This is the English channel. This is the English channel. All right. Well, there we are. So I'll repeat my question. I was saying that legislation is never perfect, and we try to improve them through the experience of our witnesses. In your view, what would be the consequences of this bill, the impact of this bill, if we were to remove some of its components in drafting it?
Yes, I agree that legislation isn't perfect, and there is a lot of reason to keep definitions somewhat open-ended so that they can be interpreted without undue restriction in real-life cases. So I would say that there is a possibility to amend this bill, change some of the terminology used, or maybe commit to some more rigorously defined terms. But I think that that would have to mean that we should maybe start from square one. I see something like, instead of gender identity and gender expression, something like transsexual status, because at least that can be corroborated by a doctor. At least you have that. I mean, that's a good start. It's not just something that exists in your mind and that you can change at whim.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Dupuy. Thank you. You've just answered my question. I had one for you, and it was exactly that one. Would the words, or would transsexual and transgender be more acceptable? It seems that you would say yes.
That's a good start. I'll have to see what the conversation around that is, but that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Ma question pour le témoin professeur.
My question for Professor Saad. Professor Saad, if I understand correctly, you teach at Concordia University. Could you tell us whether you have experimented either for the institution or for your colleagues or for individual professors through the expression of policies that don't allow you to be free in the way you teach, or through sanctions or warnings? Have you ever experienced such a thing? Secondly, can you give us some references to papers you have written, perhaps, on the issue before us, or to the works of other researchers that you may know that would help us go more deeply into this topic?
I must say that generally Concordia has been a very welcoming place, but recently I've started feeling some hints of problems that might arise. So, for example, I was hoping to organize a Freedom Summit, and I announced it on my very popular channel, a Freedom Summit where I would invite professors who are at the forefront of fighting for freedom of speech. And an administrator came to me and said that I can't use, I'm a chaired professor, I have a university-wide chair, and he said that I can't use this money to organize this meeting because it doesn't correspond to my scientific research, so that while the university broadly supports freedom of speech, my organizing a Freedom Summit did not fit within the mandate of my chair. I found that a bit suspicious. The other thing that I would say is that I used to consistently be on the front pages of the media department at Concordia. And recently, it seems as though they have misplaced my profile. So that, for example, when now I was coming to testify here in front of the Senate, and when I'm later speaking in front of parliamentarians about some of my research, no one tweeted this. In the past, they would certainly have been at the forefront of promoting my work. So it seems as though while they haven't systematically sought to limit my freedom of speech, it seems that maybe I might be angering some folks that might not be happy with my outspokenness. So that speaks to your first question. Your second question regarding some of the research I do, I founded a discipline called evolutionary consumption, which basically I apply evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology to study consumer behavior. So I study things like how hormones affect men and women's behaviors. I study a wide range of sex differences in mating behavior and gift-giving behavior and shopping behavior. So my work is at the intersection of biology, psychology, and consumer behavior. And so it's in that capacity as an evolutionary behavioral scientist that I'm here testifying.
Okay. Senator Boisvenu.
Monsieur le Président, alors,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our two witnesses for being here today. Ms. Meyer. I'm still somewhat ambivalent about this bill because, in my view, a bill should redress a situation where there is a genuine problem. I was sure that Canadian law appropriately covered transgender rights. And it's interesting to hear you because this bill isn't for us or for university professors. It's designed for you who experience the problems. So my first question is this. Given that laws do leave judges broad discretion in regard to your rights, do you believe that this bill will not, or do you fear that this bill will create false hope in transgender people?
I do, and I did make statements as to how I believe that this bill will hurt trans people more, and I think it just takes a little bit of conscientious thought and a little bit of just thinking it through in the long run, that I don't see this actually helping. And yes, of course, I've experienced discrimination because I'm trans, but I'm also speaking as someone who came from South Africa. This is an amazing country, and I worry that the freedoms that I have been given is actually being taken away by this bill, specifically my freedom of speech.
But in your situation, I'd like you to tell me in a really tangible way, how will this bill actually serve as a barrier or a step back from existing legislation?
Or a step back?
yeah.
As I said, it's not going to protect trans and gender non-conforming people any more or any less, but it will broaden the law to a point where, as I said, my freedom of speech as a trans person, Canadians' freedom of speech will be set back in a way that concerns me. And I'm also speaking, as I said, from someone who has gone to university, who has interacted with the kind of people who talk about things like gender identity and gender expression and define it in the way that Minister Wilson-Raybould, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and proponents of this bill have defined these terms. And it worries me because, well, as I said, gender expression it becomes nothing more than fashion sense. So someone who feels discriminated because they look too alternative could say that, me having tattoos and piercings is actually part of my gender expression. And so if you don't want to employ me in a nice restaurant because I have tattoos and piercings, you're discriminating to me based on my gender expression. It's just, as I said, it's just too broad. So that's...
Merci beaucoup.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So when Senator Dupuy asked you the question, so thank you very much, both of you, for your testimony. I was listening carefully, Ms. Mayer, when you were speaking about the issues you're concerned. And at first I thought one of the issues might be the penalty provisions, but you've indicated it's predominantly the definition. Or did you look at the penalty provisions as well? Or?
Yes, I did. Okay. So my main concern is the terms being used, the nomenclature behind it, the language that has been proposed in the definitions. And so I'm not in principle against, as I said, some symbolic gesture to protect transgender non-conforming people, but it needs to be something that doesn't compromise the law and our freedoms as much as this could. And as I've spoken, something like transsexual status, it's a lot more kind of verifiable by a third party. Yeah.
Okay. Senator Sinclair.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Saad, I listened carefully to your explanation about your professional expertise in the area of research that you do, and I don't see it connected to this issue in the same way maybe that you do. Your presentation, quite frankly, primarily was on the issue of political correctness and limitations on freedom of expression, as I understood it. So I begin my question with you being aware of that. So I was thinking, as I was listening to what you were saying, that you're very strong on ensuring that one's freedom of expression is not limited by laws such as this. And yet, you didn't express any concern, from what I could gather, on the issue of the discrimination that is going to occur and is occurring with regard to employment, accommodation, housing, military benefits, pension benefits, all of the other things that trans people are not going to be receiving if laws preventing that discrimination from occurring are not put in place. Are you not concerned about preventing that discrimination?
I'm fully concerned, as I conceded to the senator earlier. I'm sorry, I think Senator Jaffer. And she conceded that we seem to be in agreement that we have to protect transgendered people from exactly the cases that you're talking about. But that's not the world I live in. I'm not a landlord who may or may not discriminate against the transgendered. I'm a professor who does research on sex differences. I'm a professor who applies evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology in my work and in my teaching. And so therefore, it's not a question of just political correctness. If I get up in front of the class and I talk about how there are evolutionary pressures that result in sexual differences between males and females, could somebody who is in the class and who is transgendered argue that you did not incorporate my personhood in your lecture, and as such I felt disenfranchised and marginalized, and therefore you're engaging in some sort of bias? What if one of my students, as part of their research project, writes one of the questions, are you male or female? Would that be a form of systemic violence against the transgendered because we didn't include 31 genders? This is not facetiousness. This is real concrete examples as per what Jordan Peterson went through. So I would like to receive some assurances as to what extent does this bill go? How far does it go? I don't have the legal training that many of the folks do here, so I can't speak to that. But in reading the bill, I could see many places where my simply getting up in front of the class would constitute one big transgression, and I'm worried about that.
Thank you.
Senator Batters.
Thanks very much, both of you, for coming today. Ms. Meyer, we've had mothers of transgender children here last week, and they've talked about the terrible bullying that their children had endured. And we've been told that this policy and this bill needs to be enacted because, among other things, it will help protect these children from bullying and because suicide rates are high among the transgender community. Given that similar legislation has existed in many provinces now for many years, 2012 in Ontario, why has this failed to stop the bullying and discrimination and negative outcomes and, for example, help to reduce suicide rates that we're hearing about? So do you think that this, introducing a bill like this federally, will change those outcomes?
Usually the people who bully trans kids are other kids. I was bullied. I wouldn't want people who bullied me being charged with a hate crime or have to go to the a human rights tribunal. So I don't believe that a legislation like that we're talking about here has anything to do with that. The suicide rates, I think that people are inferring a causation where there is at best a correlation. A lot of trans people suffer from gender dysphoria, which in itself is a diagnosable mental illness. That has to be taken into account, the fact that a lot of trans people have an actual mental illness. You can't just say that, well, trans kids at school are being bullied, therefore enact a law that broadens the law so much that everyone, all of our freedom of speech is completely, jettisoned. I would have to see some more concrete evidence as to causation.
Thank you. And as a trans woman who is opposed to this particular bill, have you received any, what has been the feedback? I would imagine there's been some negative feedback that you've received in your own trans community because of the position you've publicly expressed.
I have a hard time understanding the idea of a trans community. It's a very odd kind of thing to link a bunch of people together. I have spoken to mothers of trans kids. In fact, one of them spoke here. I forget her name, but we spoke about it, and I shared with her my concerns, and she seemed to be understood where I came from. Yes, I haven't received too much hate mail.
That's good.
Yeah, so I guess that's the answer.
Right. Thank you very much for coming.
Senator Joel.
Mr. Chair, and thank you for your contribution. Sometimes you have to go to the other extreme to understand where lies the medium ground. And I tell you, when I read again Bill C-16 that you have asked us to vote against, to use the word that Ms. Mayer has asked in their concluding remarks, Bill C-16 is essentially to prevent, promoting genocide of transgender people. I mean, you're telling me today that I should vote against preventing somebody to advocate killing a person, older person, who happens to declare themselves transgender. I tell you, I have a problem with that. Transgender people are human people, and I think it should be prevented from any human being to advocate the killing of another one because that person identifies as gay or not gay or heterosexual or transgender. I mean, this is about genocide. Read section 17, 718. So, 318. I have 318. Sorry, 318. So, I have some problems of reconcilier. I mean, to put together the value of a human life with the right to life that person, because it is a human person, and that person declare themselves of one sex or another, whatever sex, and this bill says you have to protect the life of that person, whatever is the identity or the claim identity of that person. You ask me to vote against this. I have a moral problem with your request today. I tell you, at least in relation to that section of the bill, it's section 3 of the bill, I think. It's the back of this page. Let me see. Section 3. Section 3 of the bill. This is what the bill asks, Professor Saad. You come from Lebanon.
I mean, religious war, therefore, I've seen that country being torn down on religious ground. Less serious causes of killing somebody than genocide. So I have a moral problem when somebody asks me to accept that we would promote genocide of a transgender person on the only basis that that person claims is a transgender. But if I advocate the genocide of gay people, I would be prevented to do that. But to do that for transgender would be fine. I mean, where is the value of a human life in relation to your position? I have some problem with that. I can understand there are problems, practical problems, how we identify the right and the left and the middle and so forth. I totally agree with you, we can discuss that. But on the very principle of this bill, to advocate the genocide of transgender people, that's what this bill promotes.
Opportunity.
Yeah, I'm sorry to get carried by your position.
So perhaps I read the bill too late at night and I was tired, but I didn't get the feeling that when I read the bill that it only dealt with genocide. Because if it dealt only with genocide, I would probably be in a better position to argue for that protection, since I come from Lebanon and I'm a Jewish person. So I probably know about religious persecution much more than you do. But I didn't get the feeling that this bill was only about genocide. When Jordan Peterson was when people were trying to get Jordan Peterson fired from the University of Toronto as a highly esteemed psychologist, it's not because he was arguing for the genocide of transgendered people. It's because he argued that I don't wish to have someone impose upon me the pronoun by which I should be addressed. And I gave you numerous other examples whereby, in my own understanding of the bill, I would be in transgression of that bill because I would be exhibiting bias towards the transgendered. By arguing, for example, for sex differences when it comes to mating behavior and not recognizing the panoply of other personhoods, I would be engaging in systemic violence. So I don't need to be lectured about the importance of genocide. No reasonable person would support such a possibility. But I'm not here to argue for genocide. I'm here to argue about the details that got Jordan Peterson into hot water and would likely get me in hot water.
Ms. Meyer, do you want to briefly respond?
Yes, I would like to add that Bill C-16 is not just about genocide and the idea of, well, we need to add this because someone may advocate genocide towards trans people. Well, first, transgender or even transsexual, none of those are mentioned in the bill. It's gender identity and gender expression. I've already made very clear why I don't like those terms. Where are we going to stop? Should we include, weight of people? Should we include fashion sense of people, which we already will with gender expression? I mean, where will we draw the line that, because I can divide the world into as many subgroups and identities as I want and then advocate for genocide towards one of them. People who are teal.
Thank you, Senator Oliver.
Thank you. I'm struggling with which question to ask, and I'm going to try and take it in a different direction. Either one of you, and I don't remember who, said that gender expression and gender identity is in the mind, and you can't regulate and codify what's in the mind. Well, I would say that religion is in the heart, in the spirit, in the mind. And yet we provide protection to people, and you've spoken about religious persecution. We provide protection to people who practice for the practice of their religions. So I'm having a hard time figuring out this notion that human rights are only to be expressed in expressions of tangible identity. And you mentioned transsexuals. You can get it checked. You can get it verified, validated with the doctor. I'm just wondering what your response to my trouble with this position is.
Yes, well, I don't believe gender identity is something that exists only in the mind, but that is how I'm saying that the term has been defined by the Ontario Human Rights Code, which has set that precedent, by Minister Wilson-Raybould, who is the sponsor of this bill, has defined it as something that exists only in the human mind. Now, not in so much words. She said it's one's subjective sense of being a man, a woman, both or neither. That is internally contradictory. It is vastly broad. And once again, like religion, at least you can say, people congregate as a religion, they pray. There are churches and mosques. It is not something that exists purely in the mind. Maybe something like spirituality is. So I don't think that there are necessarily comparable in the way that gender identity thus far has been defined.
May I ask another question? Thank you. It's in a different stream. Will you allow that? So I want to ask you a question about this concern that both of you have, but I think Ms. Maya more has around rights creep. Today, gendered expression, tomorrow, people who wear teal. But the history of human rights in this country, which you have come to and enjoy the freedoms of as I have, has been a history of expansion of human rights, first of women, then of, when I came, it was impossible to think that gays would be protected under the Human Rights Code, and yes, they are, and the world hasn't gone ballistic, and then it went on and on. So I wonder if you can compare, you can comment on the what I would say as the civil and civilized expansion of human rights under the Canadian Human Rights Code with your notion of limitations on it. Can you project that one day there will be other identities today? Can you limit that today?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I will answer in the way that I think. I'm for protecting trans people, even if it's just symbolically, even if we already protect trans people. I'm for that, but there needs to be some prudence, some conscientiousness, as I said, and this bill does not do that. So yeah, and in the past, in history, it's always been a push-pull between liberals and conservatives so that we move forward without falling off of the cliff.
Can I answer?
Yes, please.
May I?
Yes.
I think in my opening remarks, towards the end, I mentioned two cases that speak to your question. I mentioned the transracial, so people now who proclaim that even though I am white, I self-identify as black. That's transracialism. It's a real thing. And I gave the example of so-called fat phobia, right? A much greater number of Canadians are overweight, and if we were to collectively measure the pain that they experience in terms of the daily bigotry and discrimination that they face, you're going to get a lot of bigger bang for the buck in terms of reducing discrimination if you actually pass legislation against fat-phobic people. Would that be something that we should do?
Okay, we'll have to move on. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you. I'd like to address the answer of Mr. Saad that has touched a number of times on Mr. Peterson's concern. The point's made that his job was threatened. He makes that point. That may be the case, and nobody's job should be threatened. But it's very interesting that somebody in your position and his position have tenure, he has resources, he has stature with which he has defended his job. But trans people lose their jobs, don't get jobs, and far, far worse, all the time. Violent discrimination, continual harassment. And they don't very often have tenure, and they don't very often have resources, and they don't very often, or often they don't have stature. So why is it that you can't understand somehow that all C-16 does, without in any way, shape, or form threatening you and all of the advantages that you have in our society, all it does is even the playing field by giving some protections and giving some acceptance to one of the most one of the most discriminated against and vulnerable groups of people in our society. Isn't it just quintessentially Canadian that we should extend that reach of warmth and embrace and protection to people who desperately need it?
If the bill is written in a way that it does exactly what you're saying and nothing else, and that it protects against the gray zone areas that I spoke of, then it would be a no-brainer for me to support that. As I mentioned in my opening statements, again, given my personal history, few people are in a better position to argue for why everyone should be protected, irrespective of their personhood. So you're preaching to the choir. I'm here to simply serve as the canary in the coal mine, or whatever the expression is, to say that there are details that we have to be careful about, and I share with you my details as a professor. It has nothing to do with me being tenured or being privileged. It has to do with the very real possibility that someone could come along and say, the way you're teaching your course is marginalizing me, change it or else you're biased.
Well, a lot of what you argue is, in defense of your position, is extremely hypothetical. But we actually have a hypothetical that has been tested. We have an hypothesis in your case that has been directly tested. You are saying that your course will be or could be declared transphobic if this bill is passed. But your course is under Quebec legislation. Quebec legislation has had gender identification protected for a number of years under Section 10 of the Quebec Charter, and it has never happened. You are still teaching that course, and nobody is accused or in an official way it of being a transphobic course. So why would it be that C16, that won't cover your jurisdiction where you teach at all, why would it make your case that somehow it's going to result in your course being declared transphobic? And remember, you keep repeating that you're not a lawyer, so I'm not at all certain how you could effectively make the statements that you're making.
I could speak about the general atmosphere in the trenches of academia. And so because of that, I could hypothesize the trajectory of victimhood that stifles people from speaking. I gave the example of the endless, innumerable testimonies that I received that should make every senator in this room feel very, very bad that I would be receiving such emails. And so from that perspective, perhaps, again, I'm wrong legally in that whatever you said is absolutely correct. That doesn't mean, though, that it's not something that we should be worried about. I live in the trenches of academia, and I see how terrified my colleagues are of uttering a single word out of place lest someone will be offended. That's wrong, and we should stop it.
People in this room live in the trenches
We've come to an end here, and thank you, witnesses, very much for your appearance here this evening and for your contribution to our deliberations. We're going to suspend briefly.